at our time is because I was born in the 60s, late 60s, so people don't really have a clear idea. Most of the people at that time, when we are ready to go to universities, people don't have a clear idea what architect is. So even in Tsinghua University, at that time it's called engineering. It's not really architecture. So, but I studied art when I was young. So I studied the Chinese paintings and calligraphies and a lot of things related to art. So, but at that time, it was a big decision to go to art because you know you're not gonna have a lot of money and might be tough, and also at that time the trend in the early 80s is to go to science. You know, everybody is into science and modernization and everything. So it's my parents at that time they try to find something for me. It's kind of in between. So, but everybody know one of the most famous architects in China called Liang Sicheng. You know, he did a lot of preservation, conservation of historical buildings, even during the war with Japan. So it's very well-known architect. I even know him as a model, as a role model. He's the architect. So we at that moment. I start to think, you know, maybe architecture is something that could be really interesting. So it's very interesting. It's not like today, you got information, you key in the internet, you know everything. But at that time, most people don't have ideas. I was born in Beijing, and I played in the hutongs. I was not born in the hutongs because we still live in a kind of a modern apartment. But with a lot of my friends, we always walk in hutongs, and then I remember my parents used to take me to the Summer Palace, you know, to the old historical Forbidden City, for example. At that time was not many people to go there. Less tourism. It's very cheap. You get 10 cents for the tickets. So we go almost like every month. We go there and see the exhibitions. A lot of the treasures and paintings, historical paintings. So we do a lot. You know, we learn a lot about space and material and composition, for example. So that's a lot of good influence for me, and we traveled a lot when I was a little kid. So my parents, we're not a rich family, but my parents always wants to take me to somewhere in the summer, and we see, you know, Qingdao, and see the colonial city, the Dalian, you know. We see some, you know, sort of Soviet, Japanese architecture influence. So I found out when I was in the university in the early 80s, I already kind of know a lot, sort of background knowledge of art. That really kind of helped me in the early career. I think is one thing unique about URBANUS is for us is less important just do sort of interesting, cool buildings, but really try to find the right problem and the right moment to develop the right strategy for that. So we always want to learn at the beginning. It's by a kind of research process. We want to understand if we have a project, for example, in a city, so we have to understand what the situation is. We have to do research first. And once we clearly define the problem, and then we can come up with something, a design solution later on. I think this is kind of a unique process, even from the beginning. In 1999, that's when URBANUS started 16 years ago. And at that time, the name, when we discussed the name, it really kind of reflects what we want to do, what's our design philosophy. We really thought at that moment the kind of exhilarating urbanization process in China is really the biggest at that time, biggest issue. It creates so much problems in terms of the social and cultural transformation during the process. So we are very into that and start our practice kind of, we never shifted away from that original goal. We want to really put architecture in the kind of urban consideration. We really try to learn from the urban situation and then formulate the architecture strategy. And later on, we want to use architecture as a tool, as an urban device to activate, to reorganize, to make justification, to affect a kind of a local condition. So we always use this as a tool to test whether our strategy is wrong or correct, and we can later on improve. So this is a very kind of continuous line of thinking that we never shifted away during the past 16 years. We learned a lot from the developments worldwide, since the three partners, we all kind of have very similar background. We studied here in China, and after graduation we worked in China, so we know the situation here. And then we have graduate study in the States, and then we worked several years in the States. For example, Wang Hui and me, we all in New York, and my other partner, Xiao Du, is in Atlanta. So we communicate a lot at that moment. And continue last question is the kind of urban sort of architecture, that sort of direction wasn't the kind of the main discourse at that moment in China. There were other discourses, but not many people at that time really kind of focus on the urbanization, the sort of urban approach in architecture. And we thought, three of us discussed, I think that this is the right time, really. We should start doing that, and then we should name our company really kind of related to that issue. And we're very glad that this it continues like that. But basically, when we studied in Tsinghua, but it's interesting now, we never really talked a lot because we're not in the same grade. I'm like 3 years ahead of Wang Hui, and my other partner is another 3 years before me. So we don't have a strong contact, but we know each other. And in the States, I think, when we're in New York, and we have a lot of discussions what to do, and what's the kind of point of departure, what's the major issues. So we have a lot of email back and forth, the internet talk. But that time the technology wasn't there yet. It's very difficult, but we had a lot of discussions and then write letters, trying to figure out a way to intervene into this kind of situation, but not just as an architect to design some small interesting buildings at that moment. We wanted to play a bigger role. We have a much bigger ambition to expand in a way the profession. We think that especially in China, the architecture at that time was still totally kind of controlled by the real estate market. It's very market-driven profession. Architects doesn't have a big voice at all, not as today. Today you have so many architects are very active, they have their own voice heard in the media. That time wasn't that situation. So, and we found so many problems, especially when we started in Shenzhen, which is the latest and the most developed, most quickly developed city in the world, and it created so many problems along the way. And so once we were there, and we were like newcomers, we didn't know the local situation a lot, but by observation and study, we found there are so many things that need to be rethought. And so back then, we had very intensive sort of discussions and how to organize this office and how to set up a line of research and practice.